Today I wanted to talk about paraphrasing because we're hearing from a lot of faculty that this is something that students don't have as many skills around as they'd like to see. And also, as you guys know, especially at the graduate level, using research is one of the fundamental aspects of academic writing. It's never just based on personal experience or personal opinion, it's based on scholarship and research. And when you're working with that research, you have to be very, very careful that you differentiate between when you're bringing your own ideas into the work and when you're bringing in somebody else's ideas into the work. And it's not a problem to use other people's ideas. In fact, that's a requirement for academic writing, that you do base your thoughts and your ideas and your concepts off a foundation of other work, because that's how we advance any kind of scholarship, is we build off of other people's work. The problem is when the reader can't tell what's original to you and what is actually created by someone else. And most times at this level, at the graduate level, when we see what can fall under the category of plagiarism, and I call it accidental plagiarism at this level, let's just make sure we all know what can be considered plagiarism, because this is actually one of the biggest ethical violations you can make in the academic world, is to use somebody else's work without giving it any kind of credit. So we want to make sure we understand how do we define plagiarism, what constitutes plagiarism.
Not citing.
Yeah, not citing, so not crediting. What are you citing or crediting?
Oh, an idea.
Idea, okay. What else do you want to make sure? Sorry?
Statistics.
Yeah, stats.
Findings from their research.
Yeah, so anything that somebody else has done the work to create, and they've created this data by doing the research, they've created this idea by thinking about the concept or the subject or the material. What else do we have to cite, of course? We've got ideas up there, statistics and findings.
Quotations.
Yes, thanks. So we also, of course, have to make sure that they're words. And this is really where we get into some pretty major issues, because even if you have the citation there, if you're not letting the reader know, this isn't just an idea, I put it my own words, but I'm actually using their words, then they could get problems with plagiarism, even if the citation is there. So the citation is absolutely the first place we have to start to avoid plagiarism, okay? And to give credit where credit is due. But it's not enough, because if we've also used some of their words and have not acknowledged those are their words, how do we acknowledge when we're using somebody's words besides the citation? How is it different than using their ideas? What do we have to put around them? Yeah, quotes, okay? So we need something more, if we're going to be doing direct quote. So that's the most basic way, of course, to avoid having someone not be able to understand where your ideas start and where their ideas start, or where your words start and theirs stop, is to have the citation and the quotation. But have you ever written a paper, and I will say I did this too as an undergraduate, where like 90% of the paper is direct quotation? You thought, well, they're saying it so much better. So I put it in direct quotation, direct quotation, direct quotation. What ends up happening, of course, is if somebody were to just like only have your words and ideas in there, and it was all direct quotation, this little bit, he said, she said, or he stated, or he claimed, are your own words. So it's very important that we avoid this thing that's called a quote quilt. Okay? It's called a quote quilt when it's got all the direct quotations and it's just been stitched together by a citation, or a he said, or she said, or a state. And I should try to put these things in my own words. But what happens with patch writing, which is what we're going to mostly focus on, is that they don't put enough into their own words. So maybe this part that is their words gets bigger, and then we'll have a quote, and then we'll have more of their words. But what ends up happening is we don't have any direct quotations around what is still their words. And so the reader looking at that without these things assumes this whole thing is yours, the student's work. Okay? And that's usually happens because we don't know how to paraphrase well. And paraphrasing is more for one another. Okay? If I say something like the client and the patient, okay, I am really just substituting one word that basically means the same thing for the other. It does show I understand what a client is, especially in a medical field, that they would be a patient. But it's not necessarily that I've processed it yet. And if I still use that word client and I've changed every other word around it, it may not still feel like it's my language. Okay. So I want to give you guys an example. What do you notice? Jody, would you hold yours up so everybody can see it? How much yellow is on that bottom paragraph?
Most of it.
Most of it, okay. This is a good example of patch writing because it can fool you because of the way it starts and because it's used synonyms, which means words that mean basically the same thing substituted for one another. Then the person is thinking that they are doing paraphrasing and therefore they're not going to be accused of plagiarism and they have processed the material. But really all they processed is the vocabulary. They haven't really thought about the import of this passage, why it matters, why it's significant. And you really need to do that when you're working with research, not just to avoid being accused of plagiarism, but also because you want to retain this material. The professors are not giving you these assignments just out of a whim or just to say, hey, I want to prove they read chapter 2 or whatever. They're doing it because it's material and topics and ideas that they think you should know to do well in your field. And you're not going to retain it if you don't process it. So really what we're trying to do when we're doing paraphrasing is more than just being honest, which is important. That's probably the first thing, of course, be ethical, be honest. It's to help you as learners because you will retain the information better if you put it into your own words. Okay? If you find your own structure for it. You know, for me, for example, if I want to retain something, it's not enough for me just to memorize it. I have to associate it with something. I have to say, oh, this is like so-and-so, or this reminds me of X. And that's how I can retain things. Otherwise, it's gone. If I just try to drill it into my head by repeating it, it's gone. But if I connect it to something I already know, it stays. It's the same way with language. If all we do is substitute one vocabulary term that means basically the same thing for the other, we really haven't created our own way of doing it. So the key thing to do for paraphrasing is not about word substitution, that's important. It's about structural substitution. Changing the structure of the sentence will lead you away from that problem of being too close to the original wording. Well, as I said, one of the things that really is very effective for helping people learn how to paraphrase is to recognize it's structure that makes the difference rather than just changing the wording. So I've got another little handout for you guys to work on. And this one is, there's a better paraphrase hidden here. That other one, of course, was not a good paraphrase. It was patch writing. This one has several examples of paraphrases. And what I'd like you guys to do is evaluate, use those upper level skills in Bloom's taxonomy. Evaluation is one of our most top skills. And of course, we can't evaluate until we retain. We do need retention. And see which one of these you think avoids patch writing the best. Which one is the best paraphrase in this bottom half? So I'm going to read these out loud too, and you guys tell me if you were had to rate these four, which one would be your number one choice for a very good paraphrase, which one would be maybe okay, and which two might be something that would get you accused either plagiarism or at the least would be called patch writing. So the original was, self-assessment is an appropriate way to support client-centered practice and promote personal development in young occupational therapy clients. We do have the citation, we have the direct quotation. That first thing, of course, is the best way to avoid plagiarism accusations. Just use citation, direct quotation. But as we've already discussed, it's not the best in terms of your processing the material. It's not the best in terms of showing your reader that you know something about the subject and have something real to say about the subject. Okay, so our first choice here is self-assessment is a way to support practice that centers around the client and promotes development in younger patients. Number two, to ensure their practice with younger patients stay clearly focused on and driven by the client's needs and fosters personal growth, occupational therapists can have clients evaluate themselves. Self-evaluation is a method for upholding practice that focuses on the patient and fostering personal development in the younger occupational therapy patient. Two benefits of having younger occupational therapy clients evaluate themselves is that it helps maintain a tight focus on their individual needs and it encourages personal growth. Shall we rate these? Let's see. So how many people would say number 1 is a number 1 pick? Okay. What rating did you give number 1, Jody?
It would be low.
Would be low. Okay. How about you, Elvis?
Low.
Yeah. How about you, Colleen?
I gave it a 4.
Maybe the worst 4. Okay. And I'm sorry to get your name.
Cynthia.
I'm sorry?
Cynthia?
Cynthia, what'd you give it?
4.
4. Yeah. Okay. So we get both pretty low. Okay. How about number 2, the one that starts to ensure their practice? Number 1. How many people gave that a number? Let's just show your hands. Who gave it a number 1? So 1, 2, 3. Okay. And we'll come back and talk about why. Okay. How about number 3? Self-evaluation is a method. Okay. We gave it a number 3. So it looks like number 1 we're saying is the worst one. Number 2, the next to the worst one. We're going to rate it that way. Okay. And number 4, that would leave us number 2, yes, our second best choice. Okay. Well, let's just start with this. You guys are absolutely right. Okay, that's probably the worst one here. Okay, that's the one that probably most likely gets you accused of plagiarism. What'd you notice about it, both in terms of its vocabulary choices and what else that made you say that? Let's avoid that one.
The structure of the sentence is identical.
The structure's identical. Okay, the biggest tip I can give you for effective paraphrasing is get away from the original sentence's structure. Okay. Make something else the subject. The first original passage, I can talk today, the original passage started off with self-assessment. Do not start your paraphrase with exactly the same words, or you will end up with exactly the same sentence or very close to it, because they have put some thought into structuring that sentence, the authors. They have picked a way of formulating it, and it's just going to kind of fall into that groove. You're not going to be able to get away from it. Okay? So you have to kind of jar yourself out of the groove that they already created. So the first thing I would always advise with paraphrasing is pick on something else. Don't make self-evaluation. Make the client the subject. Make the practitioners, the therapists, the subject. Make the benefit the subject. Look through and say, ultimately, what did the writer hope I'd take away from this? They'd hope I'd start using self-assessment, right? That's a way to get to a good paraphrase, is to ask yourself, ultimately, what did the writer hope I'd do as a result of what this passage is telling me? As a therapist in this case, or as a pharmacist if you're reading about pharmacy, or as a athletic director if you're doing that, okay? Then what did you hope to get from this? And ultimately the thing was, there's a benefit here, okay? And it's going to benefit these people. If you get the gist of that in there, it doesn't matter if you flip the structure. I mean, you don't need to keep the same structure. If you're getting across there's a benefit to something, that is what ultimately they want you to walk away with. But to get to that, the first thing I would always recommend is get away from that original structure. Don't start with the same first word. Don't even start with the same syntax. Now, I'm an English geek, so I throw out words like syntax and never think twice about whether someone knows what it means or not, but I should probably say syntax is just the structure of the sentence. It's the order of the words. It's how you decided you were going to structure the sentence. So the original one here had a very direct statement type of statement syntax. It had a subject, it had a verb, it had the object after that. Self-assessment is what? Okay, and it went into that itself. And what we did for the one that you guys picked is number 1, which is the one I would probably as an English teacher say that's the best choice. Notice it does not start with a declarative. Okay, it doesn't say this is this or subject verb thing. It starts with what we would call, and again, you don't need to memorize these to paraphrase well, but a prepositional phrase. Okay, it starts with what's key is we want to benefit people. Okay, it starts with that to ensure. It starts with the benefit. So it actually puts the focus right where you want it to be. That's what the structure can do. Okay, it puts it on the benefit. You're writing this paper because you want to improve practice for younger occupational therapy clients. Let's keep putting the focus on that, not on whether it's self-assessment, self-evaluation, etc.
Brenda,
Yes?
I guess it would depend on where you would use that sentence number 2 in your paragraph or in your paper, but would you cite that?
Yes, thank you. That was one thing I was going to come to.
Yeah.
Even when you put it in your own words, if somebody else developed this idea, you still have to give citation. Okay. So even if you reword it, okay, this is something somebody else researched, proved that it was beneficial, did the time and put the energy into it. And so you still need to give, what are those all two important pieces of information we need for APA? I'll give you a hint, it's shown right here.
Who and when?
Who and when, thank you. Author and date. So you still would need to give that, okay? What you would not need to give is a page number because you're not using a direct quote. Okay. You're paraphrasing, so you wouldn't have to give a page number.
That's APA, right?
That's APA, yeah. I want to be clear that some other styles do still require a page number when you're paraphrasing. Is author and date somewhere, whether it's at the footnote or if it's in the citation. Okay. Why was, just out of curiosity, because I think that you were absolutely right on, but what was the problem with number 3? And what were the issues there? Self-evaluation is a method for upholding practice that focuses on the patient. I mean, we got away from center, we got away from client, we got away from self-assessment, so the wording did change, definitely.
Structure's the same.
The structure's the same. So that's a really good example of one of those paraphrases that's ineffective because all it's done is swap one word for another. And again, it, as a writer, on the first draft, okay, is to do at least word substitution. That's a good start, okay? But all it does, again, is show the reader you understand vocabulary. It doesn't show them that you understand the importance or the message that really is trying to come across. It just shows I know how to define these words. So again, it's always better, even when you're just, it's always better to go to a different structure, not just substitute synonyms. Okay.
So Brenda, why is number 4 not as good as number 2?
Well, I would say that they're both pretty strong.
Yeah.
Okay. I would just say the one thing that happens a little bit more on 4 is that it does seem to still do a little too much of the synonym. Okay. And it would be, it's also set in a similar structure, though different. Now it's the benefits that are the subject rather than the self-evaluation. It could just slip into that groove again, just in terms of danger. Look out, Will Smith, danger. That the second one will keep you. Also, I'll tell you, you are going to understand a concept if you have to put it into your own structure in a way that you won't if you just follow their structure. So it's both in terms of protecting yourself from plagiarism, but also that processing that will move you up the taxonomy, move you into the higher levels of knowledge and understanding. What else?
I'll read the passage and then I'll put it down and cover it up. And I'll pretend that my mother is sitting next to me.
Great.
And I'll explain it to my mother out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have to understand it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good.
And then I'll try and write down what I said afterward.
Okay. So covering it up. Yeah. And then you said a second part. What was that, Lori?
Say it out loud,
Yeah.
like to a friend or...
Yeah, absolutely. This is, by the way, these tips I'm giving you on paraphrasing are also, they're great tips for understanding things and memorizing things or for a test, or how to apply something that you kind of, if you have to say it to someone, you're kind of teaching them. And whenever you teach somebody something, you have to think through the process of it a little bit more and you're going to retain it better. And so saying it out loud, we tend to use our own words more speaking than we do writing, partly because we're insecure as writers. Because we say, I'm nowhere near as erudite as that person. I don't have as good a vocabulary as them. I don't know, they just said it so well, and then here I'm trying to do the same thing and I can't do it. But we're not as insecure about our speaking in the same way. So we tend to go into our own voice when we're speaking. And when we're writing, we tend to adopt other voices until we have enough security. We tend to borrow other people's voices. And so speaking out loud and either having a recorder or writing it as you say it or having the friend that your imaginary friend can't do it for you or your imaginary mother can't do it for you. But if you actually talk it over with a friend from the class and have them take dictation, that can be a way to find your own words too. So those are really good thoughts. Any other thoughts? Henry?
Yeah, I'd say the key is understanding it. If I'm having a hard time paraphrasing, it's probably because I don't understand it.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you asked me, some characteristics of my kids, I could tell you the same characteristics 5 different ways because I'm pretty, well versed in that topic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's the understanding, and that ties right back again to what faculty are looking for when they're looking at these papers. It's not just they've gone out and done the research, but that you've understood what you've read. You've grown in your understanding of something about the field. And so until you put it into your own words, it's an ethical issue, but it's much, much more than that. It's about learning, and it's about processing. And so until you put it in your own words, you are not demonstrating to the reader that you understand the topic. You are demonstrating that you know how to pick out a good quote, which is a talent. It is a skill, and there's nothing to knock. I'm always happy to see when people use good quotations. Any other ways people do it? So talking out loud, making sure you really understand it. You know, how can you make sure you really understand it? That might be a good thing to ask, if that's what's standing in the way of paraphrasing well. How can you make sure you really understand it? It's tough, isn't it? Sometimes you have to read around that research, find other people that are talking about it in a review, see how they put it, talk to somebody else that's reading the same material, go back to your professor, okay? Again, trying to summarize it, asking questions about it. Application is what always works for me too. Like I said, association is how I remember things. Application is how I understand things. If I was going to be, out there, as I'm picking OT again, just because I found that quote, doing this, okay, how would it help me in my practice? How would it affect my practice? What would I be doing? And that will usually help me get to an understanding of how it fits into things. So definitely, absolutely, teaching it to someone else, making sure you understand material. I skipped over one thing here, and I'm sorry about that. I wanted to ask a quick question because I've been kind of dissing, direct quotation and saying, oh, we don't want that quote quilt, we want your own ideas, your own words. There are times we do want direct quotation though. Does anyone know when you might want to actually use their words as opposed to putting it into your own? Because it's very rare that we see a whole paper that doesn't have at least one quote in it, right? Any thoughts on when you might want to use their words rather than your own?
When they've said it really well, and you might not be able to say it any
Exactly.
better.
When they've said it in a really memorable way, and if you were to take that away, you'd lose a lot of the style of it. But memorable is different than clear. I think sometimes the reason people go to these patch writing paraphrases is because they say, I can't make it as clear. That's not the same thing as making it memorable. Memorable is the style of it, like don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. If we change that around to you should be a good citizen, we'd lose a lot, right? Yeah, you should give back to your country. You shouldn't worry about what it's doing for you. You'd lose a lot because you'd lose that rhythm, you'd lose that originality, that flair. So make sure you understand the difference between I'm using this because it's memorable versus I'm using this because they've said it very clearly. Any questions on this? There's one more thing I want to leave you with about using direct quotation when I would recommend using direct quotation. What if they say something really, really controversial? Something that you kind of want to distance yourself from and say, they said that, I didn't say that, they said every child under the age of 3 should be kept in a locked room because I don't want to have to listen to them. Okay, and you're trying to distance yourself from that. That's another good time to use direct quotation. So if it's very memorable, okay, and you're going to lose something really important if you change the wording, change the syntax, or if it's controversial, okay, that's the time to use direct quotation. That limits a lot of direct quotation, doesn't it? Because if you read your research articles, how much of that is very exciting, memorable language? Want to leave you with a last little pitch for the writing support faculty here and tutors here, that when in doubt, send us something. Send us the original passage and say, am I getting too close? Have I achieved a good paraphrase here? Send us a page, send us a passage, a paragraph, stop in, and we can help you with that. And we can work with you on that. Yeah, or I'd even recommend, I think Lori asked a very good question, is what is the purpose you're using it for, because context matters. And if it's a process that your faculty member would already know, you don't need to lay out the steps of the process, you need to talk about why that process wouldn't work for it. And that's where you get into your original ideas and your original wording. So in other words, you don't have to teach them what the process is.
Unless they're
What
testing you to find out that
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Yeah,
It's
so if they're
testing
just saying,
you.
do you know this process? Okay.
Yeah.
Another way to get away with that sometimes is to have an addendum at the end of the paper that has, a layout of something like the process or a graph or a chart, and then you refer to that, and that's where you do your big citation, and you could say, you know, as shown on table A, the process is, and then you cite that table information, so you don't have to keep doing the citation all the way through. Because vocabulary is tough when you're trying to come into language.
I always find the tough thing is knowing what's commonly known information and what isn't. You know, that's,
I think that's a really,
especially within a field, like say I'm a social work major, well, I'm gonna know what strengths-based practice is. And if I'm writing that for a faculty, she knows what that practice is. So, you know, I tell, and then they'll bring it to Lori Rand, who's not a social worker, and she has to decide, does that need to be cited or not? And I would say, what would you say? I would say yes.
When in doubt, I say.
Yeah.
yeah, when in doubt.
When in doubt.
It's definitely better to have
Right.
a faculty member come back to you, and I don't want to say this as a global statement, but usually most faculty members are not going to mark you down for oversicitation.
Yeah.
They're going to mark you down for not.
Unless you do
Not
every
using
single
your
sentence,
wordings.
and then they're gonna be in the meeting.
Yeah, every single one will be that kind of quote quilt that we were
Right.
talking about. Where are you? Where are you in this? That's what I always feel like when I see those. I know you've got thoughts about this. What are they?